All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for those that have introduced yourselves in the chat already. Feel free to keep doing so if you'd like. And yeah, thank you to Evelyn for raising that today is International Day of Trans Visibility Day. That's definitely a group of voters that we can consider as we're doing this important work. Um, but yeah, welcome to our activist training, Reaching Marginalized Voters. My name is Melissa Marks. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the manager of Mission Impact with the League of Women Voters of New Jersey. Um, I'll introduce Reza in just a few minutes, but Reza is working on this training with me. And this is one of our trainings for the spring activist training program semester this year. Shout out to New Jersey Coalition to End Homelessness for partnering with us on this training today. Quick bit about the League, if you don't already know who we are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. We work to encourage informed and active participation in government, increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. We're proud to be nonpartisan, so we neither support nor oppose candidates or political parties at any level of government, but we're always working on issues of vital concern to our members and the public. So we are a nonpartisan organization, but we are a political organization. So we still take stances on issues, we advocate on issues, but we do it based off of our policies, positions, and values. And Risa, you want to introduce your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Melissa. Really grateful to be able to uh, co-sponsor tonight and just League is the ideal partner. So I'm here with the New Jersey Coalition on Homelessness. I am also a member of the State Board for the League. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We're striving to end homelessness through advocacy, education, and organizing. And working to ensure that homelessness in New Jersey is rare, brief, and non-recurring. And we run the Homeless Does Not Mean Voteless Power to the Polls campaign, which is a statewide effort to engage and empower unhoused voters and let them know that not having a permanent address does not in any way, shape, or form bar you from being able to vote, and let them know how they can do so in New Jersey. And we've been working really closely with the League on this, so really grateful to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Risa. Excited to partner with you as always. Couple quick housekeeping items before we jump into the training. We are recording this training. We'll send a follow-up in an email that highlights all the materials that we cover. That includes the recording, includes a copy of the slides. So don't worry too much about taking super thorough notes. You'll get all of this in the follow-up. If you're not speaking, we ask that you stay on mute so we don't have any accidental background noises that interrupt the conversation. We'll be monitoring the chat, so please feel free to drop your questions, drop your thoughts in there as we go. If we don't get to them right away, we'll be sure to do so at the end. And when you do unmute, not everybody here knows each other, so a reminder to, remind folks who you are, where you're coming from, your pronouns if you're comfortable. These are our community norms. We hold ourselves accountable to these, and we ask that you do as well while we're together in this space. The first is to bring your full self and limit distraction so that we get the most out of our shared time here together. Remember that what is learned here leaves here. So please do share this information, tell your neighbors, tell your league members, tell your friends. Make sure that we're all, sharing this information as widely as we can. Remember that no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. So I might not know 100 million% of everything in the universe. Maybe Arisa does, but I sure don't. And so if you, have anything to add from your own experiences or you have a question, do please feel free to add that information. Together is how we get the most information out there. And all those remember to assume positive intent while also understanding the impact of your words. All right, so here's our agenda. We'll be talking about, barriers to the ballot, what that means, who faces those. We'll be talking about the rights that we have as voters. We'll be talking about what we can do to help, enfranchise voters. We'll share resources that we're going to send to you all later. If we have time, we'll do a breakout discussion to talk about, action plans that we can put together. But we might not have time, so we'll see. And then we'll definitely do Q&A as well. Um, I already welcomed Marisa, but Marisa will be, tagging in on this training as we go. If you want to say anything, go for
No worries. I'll jump in.
Great. Okay, and then yeah, so it's we're kind of covering a lot of info, so I apologize. I am going to be talking at you guys for a while. I usually try to build in more engagement opportunities, but just a lot of information. So I will be kind of talking at you a bit, but please do feel free to, put things in the chat, and we'll definitely have an engagement at the end. I do want to hear what folks are doing to reach voters and groups of marginalized voters as well. So please think about that, and then we can share them at the end. All right, so let's start with making sure we're on the same page. When we say marginalized voter, what do we mean? What are we talking about? What are we trying to express here? There's a lot of different, things that that could mean, but when I'm talking about this group of voters, I'm really talking about people that are impacted by systematic barriers to voter participation. So that means, these are barriers, these are walls, these are things in the way that make it harder for some voters to access the ballot, to access their voting rights than other voters. And those reasons are baked into the system. So it's not necessarily my fault that I have an extra barrier in my way of exercising my right to vote. And so we can see that in a lot of different ways. Um, and we can also look at it from a historical context as well as present day context. So this is not a, fully comprehensive list, but we can think about marginalized voters as voters that are impacted by voter suppression methods. Again, we can think about voter suppression methods historically and how history matters and how we are still being impacted by historical voter suppression and other systematic barriers and impacts from our history. And we can also look at what is happening currently, presently today, that is making it harder for certain groups of voters to participate in the system. In addition to those kind of physical barriers, we can also think about voters that are overlooked by traditional voter outreach methods. It makes it harder for some voters to know when elections are coming up, know that their voice matters. They're not getting the same kind of outreach as other voters. So we'll talk about that towards the end as well. Again, we can think about physical barriers to actually accessing the ballot. And we can think about barriers to information about the election. So we'll be kind of covering a lot of this as we go, but this is an idea to help us start thinking about what we mean by marginalized voters, voters that have barriers in the way that make it harder for them to access the ballot than other voters. So let's start with the historical barriers to voting. Just thinking about our history, who could vote, who had a harder time voting, who couldn't vote, and how that carries through today, and how that still impacts certain groups of voters. Initially in our country, who was initially allowed to vote? It was white men that owned property. So right away, anyone that was not a white man that owned property had faced barriers to voting. They were not allowed to vote, right? And so you can see how over the years we've enfranchised more voters and we've got rid of some of these barriers, but it took work to do that, and some of these are still carrying over to today. So in 1776, New Jersey State Constitution actually referred to voters as they. In 1790 and 1797, though, they defined voters as he or she, and voters included all free property owners until 1807. Um, and then Native Americans, African Americans, women, and immigrants were barred from voting in many states as well. So you can already see, early in our history, we're making it harder or impossible for certain groups of voters to participate in our elected election system. We're using our system that we have, democracy, our laws, to create those barriers. Those are systematic barriers. And then the 15th Amendment in 1870 granted the right to vote for men regardless of race, but was followed by intimidation tactics from those already in power, right? So we'll see this time and time again also. The desire to hold on to power does a lot to us. And in this instance, it resulted in intimidation tactics and a lot of other terrible things to make it harder for men of color to vote. Again, that's voter suppression. Those are marginalizing those voters. And then in the 19th Amendment in 1920, of course, when the League was formed, that's when that granted access for white women to the ballot. So that, hugely enfranchised many women, but not all women. And you can see, how again we're enfranchising some voters, but still making it harder for many voters to participate. And then, took the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s to, continue to fight against these barriers to the ballot. And one of the many things that we were fighting for back then, of course, was access to the ballot and full participation in our democracy. Um, and of course, some examples of voter suppression in our history: poll taxes, grandfather clauses for white voters, many forms of voter suppression that were specifically towards minority groups, women, people of color, immigrants. And so, historically, these are groups that have faced a lot of barriers to the ballot. In 1965, we passed the Voting Rights Act, which really helped to address a lot of these issues, and provided legal support for voters to gain their right to vote back. But and then in the 26th Amendment and other laws enfranchised even more voters. But as recently as 2013, Shelby County versus Holder, that decision gutted a lot of the important provisions in the Voting Rights Act. So on a side note, that's why we're working on a state voting rights act here in New Jersey, and working for stronger protections at the federal level. But you can see, even in our recent history, we're still making it harder for these groups of voters to participate in the system. So what are some examples present day, some, more obvious maybe examples that we can look around and see in our communities? Voter ID laws, anything that is requiring additional proof of citizenship, that is a form of voter suppression. And that is making it harder for certain groups of voters to vote, right? We'll talk about that more in a minute, but you're already required to prove your citizenship and to provide identity when you register to vote. Making an additional barrier to show your voter ID or to prove your citizenship to then exercise that right to vote, there's an unnecessary barrier. That is another form of voter suppression that is marginalizing and disenfranchising voters.
And I'll
Um,
just mention here
mhm.
as well, because one of the things that is really good about New Jersey is that we don't have a voter ID law. And whenever we do trainings about for unhoused voters, like letting people know homeless does not mean voteless, one of the first concerns people raise is, don't I need an ID? Like, isn't that going to get in my way? And so when you think about also who is disproportionately impacted by voter ID laws, that is an additional barrier that many marginalized voters face. And even without the presence of that barrier in New Jersey, the fear that that barrier might be in place or the belief that it might be in place can prevent people from exercising that right. So I just wanted to add that in.
Yes, perfect. No, super well said. And another really, specific example about what the impacts that has and that the rhetoric around it has, right? The voter registration deadline, it can be used as a tool for voter suppression. Here in New Jersey, we have a 21-day deadline. You have to register 21 days before an election to vote in that election, right? If you were released from prison, for example, within that 21-day deadline, oops, too bad, sorry, you don't actually have that right to vote that you're supposed to have. And so there's, multiple examples as to who that might impact, but it's just an arbitrary deadline and unfortunately disenfranchises voters every election. So again, side note, that's why we're working for same-day voter registration. But that can be another form of voter suppression that voters experience. Again, like people that are more likely to move, those can be voters that are marginalized by the voter registration deadline. So you can think about that in your targeting. Language access, voters that, are eligible in every way, but maybe English is not their first language, not having enough language access to the ballot, to voter registration, to voting information, that can act as a voter suppression tool, making it harder and a barrier for voters, making it harder for them to access their right to vote. Physical accessibility, right? Being able to get to the polls, being able to get to the polling location, when they're open, being able to get to the ballot. accessibility can be a major issue for disabled voters, but for any voter, if you're in the hospital, if anything happens. Um, Intimidation, the voter ID law issue that Raisa mentioned, that's a form of intimidation, right? Spreading mis and disinformation about what is or isn't required and creating fear about not knowing what you need in order to vote is an intimidation tactic. And we definitely see, a lot of intimidation, unfortunately, around voting. Um, a recent example is that at the end of last year, the league was blocked from partnering with USCIS. So now we can't go and register new citizens during the new citizenship ceremonies, right? That was a great way for us to enfranchise voters. Now we can't provide that information right then and there. So that's a form of disenfranchising voters and making it harder for them to access the info that they need. Vote by mail restrictions, we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute, but when states make it harder to vote by mail and create unnecessary loopholes and hurdles, those can be examples of creating barriers, right? I'll kind of zip through these next few, but you get the idea. So, polling place consolidation, when we make it fewer polling locations, that means somebody is further away from the polls and it's harder for them to vote potentially. Voting roll purges, when we, are cleaning up the voting rolls and we accidentally make people fly off the voting rolls, that can obviously endanger somebody's ability to vote. Gerrymandering, when you're limiting our voices and making it feel like we are powerless in our vote. Um, Again, any limiting to vote by mail or early voting. Disenfranchisement for criminal records if we don't allow folks with a criminal record to participate. Lack of transportation to help people get to polling locations. Access to childcare can be a barrier. Access to a computer can be a barrier. So, this is not a fully comprehensive list. Please feel free to drop in the chat some other voter suppression tactics or barriers that you've seen and experienced. But these are all things that you can look out for. And a couple new exciting voter suppression tactics that we need to make sure we're aware of today. Um, so that folks know, unfortunately, there's been a change to USPS. You might have seen this already, but now USPS considers mail postmarked to be different than how they used to define it. So it used to be that when you put your vote by mail ballot in the mail and the mail carrier picked it up from the mailbox, that was postmarked. It was postmarked, you were good at that point. Now, unfortunately, it's not considered postmarked until it's actually been processed and by the post office. And so that can be multiple days later. So we need to know this when we're doing our voter outreach and our voter education, because if folks are voting by mail and they plan to put their vote by mail ballot through the mail, they need to do it multiple days in advance. So this is a new law. People are likely not going to be super aware of it. So make sure you're incorporating this into the work that you're doing. And so now we are just recommending that folks that are voting by mail return it through a secure ballot drop box. There's ballot drop boxes in every county. Hopefully there's one close enough to the voters that you're talking to. They can just plop them in the drop box, bring them over by, when polls close on election day and return them that way. Another option is to bring them to the County Board of Elections office by the time that polls close on election day. And if your voter really needs to use the mailbox, just make sure that they put it in the mail multiple days in advance, as in advance as they can. And then this thankfully is not in effect currently, but I did want to mention the SAVE Act as a potential voter suppression method. This would unfortunately disenfranchise millions of voters and would be an extremely harmful new way of creating barriers to the ballot. So, of course, we're opposing this nationally. The SAVE Act would require documentary proof of citizenship to vote, and it is a form of voter suppression. It's unnecessary, right? Every state already requires to affirm or verify citizenship status when registering and voting. So this is an additional barrier that is not necessary. And it's also based on falsities and mis and disinformation because widespread voter registration and voting in, because yeah, widespread voting, registration and voting in federal elections by non-citizens is not happening. It's just not happening. And so it's untrue to say that we need this law to stop it from happening. So it would make it harder for millions of eligible voters to register and cast their ballots as a result. Just a handful of examples of groups that would be most impacted by this law and would now become even more marginalized voters, military members, because they move a lot. And so requiring documentation every single time they move and register, that would create additional barriers. People of color would be particularly impacted by this law as well, because compared to white citizens, citizens of color are 3 times more likely to lack documents like birth certificates, passports, and Australian certificates, or certificates of citizenship, or face difficulties accessing them. Um, and so there's not a coincidence that we're seeing women and people of color pop up on multiple of these voter suppression tactics, right? Um, these groups are repeatedly targeted to make it harder for us to vote. Natural disaster survivors, right? If you're anything that requires you to possibly lose documentation or move quickly, domestic violence survivors, families that had to flee flooding or fires, these are going to be people that are less likely to have this information and be able to prove and exercise their right to vote. And then, anyone that is more likely to change their name, trans folks, women, and studies show that an estimated 69 million American women lack the information needed to prove their name. So yeah, it would be really bad. So let's, keep this in mind as we continue to do our voter outreach, and consider the groups of voters that are typically targeted in voter suppression tactics like this and how we can work with those voters to enfranchise them. Risa, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm gonna not be surprising when I jump in on this, but when we're talking about who the SAVE Act affects and we're talking about people who often lose important documentation, obviously unhoused voters would also be on that list.
Yeah, 100%. You think, yeah, unhoused voters, anyone that just it's easy, right? It's easy to not have the documentation. I don't know where mine is, to be honest, somewhere in my parents' house. Like, it's understandable that you might not have the info, and it shouldn't mean that you can't vote. Um, So yeah, again, like thinking about what the groups are that are most impacted by the voter suppression that we've been talking about: unhoused voters, voters of color, disabled voters, multilingual voters, formerly incarcerated voters, new citizens and first-time voters, women, young voters, again, first-time voters, voters in communities that are far from polling places or public transportation. So these are all groups of voters that we can think about how we can reach them. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Did you want to elaborate a bit more on unhoused voters here, or was it later in the training? Do you remember, Arisa?
I think maybe a little bit later, but let me know if I can jump in at any time, but maybe we'll keep going for now.
Sounds good. We'll call you back as needed. Um, Now I want to have a little bit more positivity in our discussion because I know this has been frustrating to think about. So, it's not all bad news. There have been certainly many things done to remove these barriers that we're talking about and make it easier for folks to participate and to enfranchise voters. So, some examples, these both are new for 2026. So, you definitely want to be incorporating these into your voter outreach and voter education that you're doing. So for those that don't know, registered voters that will be 18 by the general election, so in this case, the November 4, 2026 election, they can vote in the June primary, even if they will be 17 for that primary. So this is a really great way to enfranchise younger voters to participate, first-time voters. This is a group of marginalized voters, and now we're saying, hey, you're gonna vote for the people on the ballot in the general election. Shouldn't you have a say for who makes it to that ballot? shouldn't you be able to participate in the primary? So, we are very proud to have worked on this bill, and we're really excited that it's finally being implemented this year. So definitely make sure young folks know because it's new. It's very understandable if they don't. And the more that people are civically engaged and participate in elections, the more they're building those habits, and they'll continue to do so repeatedly moving forward. And then also for 2026, we can now in New Jersey apply for a vote by mail ballot online. So in the past, you could only apply through the mail or in person, but now you can super easily apply for a vote by mail ballot online. The deadline to apply online is the same as the deadline for vote by mail application through the mail. So keep an eye on those deadlines. But this is great. It makes it easier, right? Anything that makes it easier and removes barriers, allows people to exercise their right to vote are ways that we can enfranchise voters. Some slightly later, but still pretty recent examples of removing barriers in New Jersey include early voting. We've only had early voting for a few years now. To me, it feels like we've had it forever, but we didn't until recently. And it's a huge change in being able to vote. Now, if you work on Tuesday from 6 to 8 p.m., you can't get to the polls. You can vote the weekend before or the week before. It just gives voters so much more flexibility and ability to participate. So that's a huge way to enfranchise voters. Rights restoration is another, really important enfranchisement change. Back in about 2019, 2020, New Jersey granted folks with criminal history the ability to vote again. So before, if you had an incarceration record, you couldn't vote. But now, thankfully, you can. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. But it's important because folks do need to re-register. So if you are talking to this community, working with this community, make sure that they know that they need to re-register when they're done serving their sentence. A vote by mail in general is a way to make it easier for folks to participate in the election. And there's different things to even within vote by mail that have made it easier over the years. Thinking about ballot bearers, making it easier um, to cast your ballot, even if you are, not super mobile. And then drop boxes as well. Again, providing these drop boxes in counties all over the state make it super easy to get those completed ballots in. And we had recent changes to the ballot cure as well. The ability to fix certain mistakes that you might have made on your vote by mail ballot so that that vote counts. And then just some quick numbers to kind of demonstrate what we're talking about looks like. Um, Pew Research, according to Pew Research, so consistent with longstanding patterns in turnout, voters and non-voters in 2024 differed substantially on several demographic characteristics. Compared with voters, non-voters were younger, had lower family incomes, and were less likely to be white or have attended college. So, these are all groups that we've been talking about facing barriers to vote. So it's not a surprise that we see voter turnout numbers are in fact lower among these groups of voters. Young voters specifically were a large share of the non-voters. So a lot of young voters didn't vote in 2024 compared to 2020. Um, and 48% of non-voters only had a high school education or less. We haven't talked a ton about economic ability as a barrier to the ballot, but it definitely is, right? When we're talking about being able to get to the polling locations, having your own car, relying on public transportation, working multiple jobs, having the time to, have childcare, go to the polls, all of these things are major factors, and just again making it just a little bit harder. If it's just a little bit harder to vote, then you might not end up voting, and that's a problem. And then, Marisa, did you want to talk about this?
Sure, absolutely. So nationally, we see that about 60% of people experiencing homelessness are eligible to vote, but less than 30% are registered. And even more striking than that, we only see around an estimated 10% voter turnout among homeless people nationally, which that's a huge drop off. And it sort of speaks to multiple things, the barrier of registering, but then also the barrier of once people are registered, are they actually able to get to the polls? Um, and all of the things that Melissa had talked about, whether it be, you know, access to transportation, the time, access to childcare, all of those things can be particular barriers. And so there, it kind of speaks to the dual role of number one, making sure that people know they can register, registering them, but then the need for continued engagement.
Awesome. Thank you, Raisa. So now I want to talk quickly about why we care. We've been talking a lot about, these different stats and things, but why does it matter? Why do I care that some voters have a harder time accessing the ballot than others? And there's a lot of reasons. It's not a fully comprehensive list, but at the League, we all believe that a strong democracy is an actively engaged democracy, a democracy where everyone is encouraged and able to fully participate in the system. And so, one reason is that different lived experiences and perspectives are necessary to finding solutions and addressing the needs of our community. When lots of different people, diverse groups of people with different backgrounds, and ways of thinking are all working together to find solutions and address problems, that's how we're going to find the answers. If it's just white men voting and just white men being elected, that is not a full, diverse lived experience that is going into, solving our problems. So we need an engaged democracy with lots of different folks from different backgrounds, with ideas and perspectives that are working together to come up with solutions that actually help solve the problems, right? A diverse electorate also better represents the makeup of our state. We're a very diverse state, which is great. And so we want the people voting to reflect that diversity, right? Um, and so empowering people to vote is super important. A diverse electorate creates belonging, accountability, and community to empower residents to use their voice. When lots of different people in different neighborhoods and communities are voting, then more people will vote too, right? If I see someone that looks like me voting, I'm more likely to then go and vote. So the more people that are voting, the more people that are voting and feel empowered, and feel like they can hold people accountable with their own power. The democratic process should capture the voices of all residents, not just the ones that are most likely to vote. We know that unfortunately, the folks in power are more likely to listen to people that vote, right? If I was elected by, all 20-year-olds, then I'm going to really respond to 20-year-olds, and I'm going to care about what the 20-year-olds think. So the more people that are voting, the more, groups and communities that are voting, our elected officials are going to be forced to pay attention to all of those groups of people and care about what they think. So what can we do? There's certainly a lot that we can do. So in all that you're thinking, you should always really be thinking about building trust, because it's really important if you're trying to reach a group of voters or community of voters that you have trust with that community, or else it's not going to work. It's going to come off as inauthentic, and you're not going to be able to connect to those folks. So thinking about how to build trust, one way is community partnerships, and I'll elaborate on that more in a second. Culturally competent messaging. So making sure that you're thinking about the language you're using, you have language translations, accessibility for the materials that you're providing, that what you're saying is actually relevant to the group that you're talking to. So if we take young voters for a second, I don't know what a young voter cares about, to be honest. So if I am trying to think about what am I going to say to get this 18-year-old to vote, it's better for me to ask another 18-year-old, hey, 18-year-old, what makes you vote? Why do you care? What do you think will help your friends vote? And so tailoring our messaging to actually be relatable and relevant to that group of voters is really important. And then, of course, you need trusted messengers as well. So this is goes gets tied in with community partners. How can we find trusted messengers of the communities that we're trying to reach and empower those folks to do, to kind of to work with their communities? So if we're talking about, I'll use homeless voters, unhoused voters. Finding Raisa and Raisa, working with her homeless shelters and her soup kitchens and making sure that they have the information that is, accurate, that is relevant, then they're empowered to then deliver those messages to the people that they're serving. Those folks think they have trust with the people in these services already, right? So that message coming from someone that they already know, they already trust, is going to be much more powerful than if I were to, necessarily walk up to someone and start saying the same thing, which doesn't mean that I shouldn't, right? We should still absolutely still be having these conversations whenever we can. But when we're thinking about like the campaign that we're building, making sure that we're finding trusted messengers and we're thinking about the best ways to reach these communities. So next I want to talk about knowing your rights. So a huge piece of how we can help break down these barriers is by making sure we understand what the rules are so that we can help other people understand what the rules are, right? So I'm going to provide in the follow-up email a more thorough um, resource for our voting rights, but this is a highlight of what is, I think some of the relevant things for our conversation today. So, returning citizens. So, this is for formerly incarcerated citizens. When who can vote? What are the laws? What are the rules? So, in New Jersey, you can vote if you've served a sentence of incarceration. You can vote if you have been charged but not sentenced yet, right? Innocent until proven guilty. So, if you're charged, you're not necessarily guilty. You can vote. You're able to vote. Um, and you can also vote if you're out on bail and pending appeal. You can vote if you're being released from prison. You can vote if you're on parole and probation. You just can't vote if you're currently incarcerated and serving a felony sentence in New Jersey right now, unfortunately. And then again, it's really important to remember that folks have to re-register after completing that sentence. So, if I was a registered active voter and then I served my sentence of incarceration, even though I was already an active voter, I still have to re-register when I complete that sentence. So, these are all important things that you need to, keep in mind as you're working with this community of voters. Go ahead, Raisa, you want to say something?
Yeah,
Oh, you want to do the
absolutely.
next? Yeah.
No, I figured I'd give you a chance to rest your voice. Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, so when it comes to homeless voters, making sure that people know the addresses that they can use. The most important thing, so on the registration form, when it says home address or residence, the you can use a lot of things even if you don't have a permanent home address. The most important thing is whatever address you use in that section, whatever you put down, is where your polling site will then be located. It will impact kind of the very local elections that are going to show up on your ballot. So you want to pick a location for a person that reflects where they spend their most of their time so that it's actually reflecting kind of a polling site that's close to them, and the candidates that they're voting on are the ones that have the most impact on their day-to-day life. Um, but there are a bunch of different addresses that you can use. So a shelter or a social service agency address, an unhoused voter can use that. Oftentimes that is really simple and the easiest. But people can also use a street address. So if someone is unsheltered and they'd rather use a street corner or park or an address outside of a business, they do have the right to do that in New Jersey. Um, People can also use parole probation offices if they kind of have intersecting identity there. Um, Former residential address or a friend's address near you. And some counties will allow voters to use their kind of superintendent of election office address, but you would want to check before you recommend that because there are counties that do not. Um, but letting people know that they have this array of different addresses that they can use so they can make that decision. And the other piece when it comes to registering unhoused voters, letting people know that they can vote by mail. Um, because on the registration form there's a section that says home address, which we sort of talked about the different addresses that people can use for that, but there's also one that says mailing address. So if somebody uses put something down for their home address, which is not a place where they can receive mail, they can still put something down for a mailing address with an agency where they can get their mail or with some place that they can. Um, and I'll just note when it comes to the mailing address, so the mail-in ballots, the mail-in ballot that you will see on the voter registration form, there's a little box where you can say, "Oh, request a mail-in ballot." If you check that box on the typical registration form, um, which is like section 14 or something on the form, it would sign you up for a mail-in ballot for every election moving forward until you request otherwise in writing from the county clerk. Now, somebody who might move around a lot, who might be transient, if they're experiencing homelessness, that might be kind of a big barrier. So letting people know, like, hey, if you are requesting a mail-in ballot, you might want to fill out a specific mail-in ballot request form versus requesting the mail-in ballot through the general voter registration form, because in the mail-in ballot request form, you can request it just for one election, versus automatically signing up for every election moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Risa. It's important to keep in mind as you're working with those voters. And then, like I said, there are a lot of more voting rights, but these are a quick summary of ones that I think are relevant, and I'll share the full resource later. But language assistance and disability accommodations are available by law. So if you're talking to these voters and they're like, unsure of what to do when they get to the polling location, they are guaranteed accommodations, and they can always ask the poll worker or talk to the poll worker if they need additional help. Um, all polls and voting machines are required to be accessible, right? So if you are at a polling location and you don't see a way for somebody in a wheelchair to get into the polling location, or you don't see enough signs, you don't see enough this or enough that, talk to the poll worker or report it, because it is legally required for all polling locations and voting machines to be accessible. You are allowed to bring your children into the voting booth with you. So, if you're talking to someone, oh, I don't have childcare, I can't vote, they can bring their child in with them. They are allowed to do that. Voters are also allowed to bring someone of your choice into the voting booth to assist you with voting if you cannot read or write English or have a disability. And again, you can also request that special assistance from a poll worker as well. You're allowed to vote under your previous name if you've changed your name since registering to vote, and you're allowed to vote by provisional ballot. So, this can come up if, say, you go to your polling place, you're sure that you registered with this, to be, and this is your right polling place, you're not on the rolls, they don't see you for whatever reason. You can vote by provisional ballot, and then that will be confirmed later. And if you were supposed to be on those rolls, then your vote will count. And same with, like, if you did sign up to vote by mail in every election, maybe you didn't realize, or you changed your mind, or you lost your ballot, or whatever. You can still go to the polls, you can vote by provisional ballot, and then as long as you didn't also vote by mail, that provisional ballot should be counted. So folks have, these rights, and should be taking advantage of those rights, using them. Some more reminders. Again, in New Jersey, like Raisa said, we have good voter ID laws, and we are not required to have IDs at the polls. The only instance in which it is allowed to be asked by the poll worker for your ID is if you're a first-time voter, you just registered to vote by mail, and you did not provide the proper ID, or maybe you had like a typo in it or an error or something, and they could not verify that ID. So only in that instance would they ask for your ID at the polls. But if you're there your votings and you voted before and somebody asked you, a poll worker asked you for your ID, that is not allowed. So definitely, push back on that and make sure folks know they should not have to provide their voter ID in almost every instance. And then when registering to vote, you can either list the last four digits of your social security number or New Jersey driver's license or non-driver ID. So voters also have multiple options for the ID that they use when registering to vote. Oh yeah, and then we just wanted to remind folks that early voting is a really great option for all sorts of voters, but definitely including unhoused voters, because you have, 3 to 9 days to choose from, and you can vote in any early voting polling location in your county. Okay, I know we're close on time, so I'm going to try to speed through. So, some things that we can do to help voters overcome barriers. So, thinking about targeted outreach in the work that we're doing, right? Um, so so one group of voters, or one thing to think about is who is not already getting the information, who is less likely to be knocked on doors by a campaign, or who is less likely to, get the traditional voter contact methods that are out there. That's why when we do our get out the vote work, um, we target low propensity voters. Campaigns are typically going to target voters that they are pretty sure are going to vote, and they're just trying to make sure that those voters vote for their candidate, right? But we don't necessarily want to talk to people that are already going to vote. We want to find the people that are less likely to vote, that have barriers that they need help overcoming, that maybe feel disenfranchised and need that, to be invited to participate. Those are the voters that we want to be thinking about and that we want to be targeting. So thinking of targeting voters maybe that don't vote in primaries normally. How do we encourage them to participate in a primary? Or they only vote in presidential elections, or they only vote in midterm elections. Let's get those voters to vote in off-year local New Jersey state elections. Let's get them to vote in school board elections. Let's find these voters that are not, likely to vote or likely to receive the traditional voter outreach, and let's do that outreach ourselves. So minority voters in your community, so voters that again are not looked at as like the political power in your district. They might not be getting the traditional voter outreach, knocking on their doors. Young voters, they, aren't necessarily like seasoned voters, or they don't vote super often. Again, unhoused voters. I don't think that these campaigns are walking around looking for unhoused voters to talk to, right? So we can play that role. Formerly incarcerated voters, same thing. Disabled voters, same thing. So thinking about these groups of voters and trying to fill in the voter outreach gap to help. And then some strategies that you can use to help voters overcome the barriers that they may be facing. Ballot bearers, again, you can be a ballot bearer for somebody. There's rules. I'll send in the follow-up email and make sure you have access to that. But you can deliver somebody's completed vote by mail ballot for them. If they ask you to and they want your help, you can help them complete and cast, not complete, you can help them cast that completed vote by mail ballot to remove that barrier for them. You can provide rides to voters that don't have, access to a car or public transportation. You can, of course, educate folks about the rights that we discussed that they have and about early voting, vote by mail, voting at 17, other voting rights that might help them enfranchise their vote. Thinking about community partners and how you can work with them, and how you can, for example, get community partners to help unhoused voters use their address, or get their mail. Um, Other strategies that you can use, again, providing voter education materials to direct service organizations. If my organization is feeding people, I don't necessarily have the time, the capacity, the bandwidth to get detailed flyers and rack cards, but the league does. So we can give those flyers and rack cards to those locations. Did you want to say something on that, Reza?
I was just gonna say that a lot of what we've we've done with the league has been really just like saying, okay, how can you work with, you know, shelters, drop-in centers, um, there's these lived experience local advisory boards that advise that people have lived experiences of homelessness that often are really connected to some people doing street outreach. So how can you work with them? So I was just going to amplify that, but back to you because I know we're short on time.
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you. Again, report issues that you see, don't just let it go. Often, if you see an issue, the poll worker might just not be aware. Like there's no signs. Oh, I forgot to put the signs out. Thank you for reminding me. It doesn't have to be a five-alarm fire, but making sure that you do kind of lift any issues that you see. And then I also like to talk about using positive language when we're talking to a voter, or if we're talking to a voter, we don't want to judge or assume, right? Oh, you're not planning to vote. We don't want to just decide like, oh, it's because they don't care, or it's because, this, or assume that, right? Oh, this person isn't planning to vote. Let me figure out why, and let me see if I can help that voter. So being positive, being problem solving in your thinking, and using language that is going to help solve a problem and not help further alienate somebody. So inviting people to participating in voting, that's really important. Oh, cool, I'm voting on Tuesday. You want to come with me? Let's make this fun. Let's make this positive. When we're seeing our communities vote and our friends vote, and we're being invited to participate, we're going to be more likely to want to do it. It becomes something fun and something cool and something powerful and not a chore that you're going to push off, right? Again, identifying the barriers. Oh, right on, you're not voting, you're not planning to vote. Can I ask why? Oh, you work on Tuesday. Well, did you know early voting is an option? Let me talk about that. Or what about vote by mail? Or, oh, you don't like any of the candidates, they don't look like you. I feel you, I understand. Well, the way that I like to think about it is that when I vote, the politicians they see, oh, a woman voted. The more women that vote, the more a politician will see that group as a voting block. And then in the future, the more candidates might think, oh, I can actually have a chance to win here because women vote and I'm a woman, and now I'm going to run. And now you have a candidate that you can vote for. So, thinking about how you can help identify these barriers, help folks solve them and feel empowered in the election process and not feel like it's a chore or something they don't want to do. So, quickly, understanding your community, who lives in my community, who faces barriers, who votes, who doesn't vote, what potential partners exist that I can work with, who's in the room, who's missing, who's in the coalition, who's missing. Sorry, my computer is running low. So ask yourselves these questions and your groups these questions as you're planning your voter outreach. We have these hotlines that you can provide to folks so they can get help as needed. I'll send this in a follow-up email. And then these are a bunch of resources that we're going to send as well, so they'll be in the follow-up email. And then very quickly, yeah, just take action, right? Use what we talked about today. Find some partners, make a plan, figure out who you're going to target, who you're going to reach, and build long-term relationships with those groups as well. So we're at almost at the hour, so I'm gonna take a pause here, see if there's any questions. And in addition to questions, if people just want to share, what have you done to reach voters? What has worked? What has been successful? If folks want to share that as well. But Jill, go ahead.
I'll also mention there is a question in the chat currently from Charles. So just putting that on the radar.
Okay, thank you. Let me do Jill's question, then I'll do Charles. But Jill, you have to unmute. Jill, you have to unmute.
Okay, that's
Hello.
better.
Yes.
Okay. I have been doing reentry with a couple of people from Ocean County, where I'm from the Ocean County chapter. And one of the things you said surprised me. Voters must re-register to vote after completing their sentences. We use an app called New Jersey Votes, and we look each person up. And if they are currently still registered, we take that as a fact and we do not re-register them. And I hope we haven't been making a mistake. If when they put in their name and their birth date and it comes out no details or whatever it says, then we ask them if they would like to be registered to vote. But if they're already registered, some of them are surprised they're still registered on the books. But
Yeah, I mean, I
is
think
there a
there's
need to
lots of
re-register? Is there a need to re-register if they're showing that they're on the books?
if they're showing on the books, it should be fine. Like, there's lots of reasons why somebody might be registered and not realize that they were registered, right? So I think that is definitely something that, somebody might have like gotten a driver's license or, done this or done that and gotten re-registered without
They
realizing.
these ladies and gentlemen are recently released because they're at reentry and they're filling out their paperwork and doing all of those things. I'm thinking maybe their sentences were so short they didn't get purged, but I don't know that for a fact.
Would be.
Um, Another thing that comes up sometimes is inactive. Now, we weren't sure what that meant, but I have a family member who showed up at the poll this last election and was inactive. And the only thing she had to do was show up and vote, and then she was active. There was nothing else to do. Is that also true?
Yeah, so inactive voters, I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's like a certain number of years of not voting. I think you can be taken off the list, but like if they're on the list, then they should be fine. But I
Okay.
would say, yeah, like so the registration check that I put in the chat, so everyone vote.nj.gov is a great resource. So if anyone isn't sure, like, oh, am I active? Did I re-register? Am I registered at the right address, whatever, with the right party, like having them go to the voter registration check and confirm. So
Yeah.
ideally before the voter registration deadline. That's another reason why the 21-day deadline is a problem. But yeah, that's definitely part of your outreach is, oh, you're not sure, like let's check, let's pull it up, let's go to New
Yeah.
Jersey's website. And if they're not showing up or they're showing up with wrong information, then just, re-registering or
Yeah.
updating the voter reg
Right. Right.
info.
Well, at reentry, we check them all just to make sure, unless someone says, "I know I am," or "I know I never was," that kind of thing. And also, just to in the area of barriers, I'm sure that you've heard that several reentries in different counties have been closed. Ocean County and Tom's River was closed. They said it was due to finances. So now all the Ocean County people have to be bused into Monmouth County. And we're not even sure if this prohibits some of them from showing up, but there are at least two or three reentries in North Jersey that were also closed.
Yeah, yeah, no, closing, places, certain direct services that are helping people.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And when
Thank
we
you.
brought this up to council members in town, they weren't even aware of it.
Yeah.
So that's that.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for raising it. Yeah. Raisa, were you jumping in there?
No, I was
Thank you.
just saying thank you so much for raising that. That's really good to know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jill. Okay, so I see a question about ballot drop boxes. So I think you're talking about like ballot bearers now. Um, I can't find the exact. I think it's like three something. Again, I'll send the follow-up email, but I think it's like you can be a ballot bearer for three people. Um, yeah, JJ agrees three. So what that means is you can help somebody. They have to do the vote by mail ballot themselves, but you can help them. You'll sign the front. There's a place that you can sign, and then you can bring that ballot to the drop box for them. So you can help folks to drop their completed vote by mail ballots off in ballot boxes and just keep track of that because there's a limit to the number that an individual can do. Okay, were there any other questions that folks had? I see lots of good stuff in the chat, so thanks everyone for being active there and sharing your experiences. All right, if there's no more questions, oh, here's the question slide. Yeah, just want to say thank you all so much. We obviously don't have time for the breakout discussions, but you can have those in your own groups and your own leagues. Feel free to join us, join the league if you're not already a member. We'd love to have you. And yeah, just thank you so much for being here, for doing the important work on the ground, and reach out anytime if you want to connect or have further questions. And thank you so much, Raisa. You are the best. I appreciate you.
Thank
Is there,
thank you, Melissa. You are the best. And just very grateful to you all showed up. If there are any other questions that come up, please.
any way that we can get this pushed out? Because this year, especially with the SAVE Act, it's so important for us to reach even regular voters that vote all the time. Is there any way we can do a podcast, do classes in a library, or do this democracy and donuts for young people? Can we get it out more? How can we push it out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think local leagues are an amazing resource for this, right? So talking to your local leagues, working with your local leagues and bringing these ideas and the urgency for this to your local leagues and other groups too, is exactly kind of what the leagues are for, doing this organizing work in communities, right? Um, yeah, in terms of a podcast, I don't know if we would get
Well,
anyone to listen to us.
yeah,
But
podcast.
yeah, no, for sure. I think you're
It
right,
is
JJ.
better if you can meet the people, but
Right.
if you can't meet them, at least we're letting it be known, what's
Yeah.
out there. And
Yeah,
thank
no,
God we're in New Jersey, where you go to other places, and if you make a mistake voting, they throw you in jail. So
definitely, working in community and finding those groups, where are people going? Like who is being reached by what groups? How can I partner with that group to reach those people?
I think it's such a sin that in a lot of these states, they don't allow the college kids to vote in their college. They make it harder for them where they have to go
Mhm.
out, no transportation, particularly in the southern states, you know? Um,
In
just
New
just terrible.
Jersey, yeah, you can, even if you don't live, like if it's not your permanent residence, if you go to school here, you can vote here. Yeah, so that's another important thing. Thank you, JJ. And yes, to answer your question in the chat, we're going to send the recording in the follow-up email as well as a copy of the slides. So
Great.
yeah, you'll see those. All right. All right. So we can keep these conversations. Feel free to reach out if you have more questions, but I don't want to take up more of people's time. So thank you all so much. Thank you for doing the work and yeah, start getting on the ground. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Everyone.